Good morning, WTOB listeners. This is For the Record with Greenwood Law. I'm Dylan Greenwood here with attorney Harold Eustache, and today we're going to be talking to you about some of the dangers and things that happen with internet usage by our young people, our teenagers. The way this came about for us to talk about today was that there's been a pretty significant case that's been in the news out of Davidson County involving a young lady by the name of Savannah Childress. And Miss Childress was contacted by an individual online through social media, and he posed as someone that was her age, gained her trust that way, and then pulled the rug out from under her and revealed that he was not, in fact, one of her peers. And then that led to a situation where he abducted her and took her out of state to Arkansas. That eventually culminated into a standoff with police where he ended up shooting and killing himself. Thankfully, Miss Childress lived, and she's now back at home.
She did, and it was part of that last little, there was a shootout between police, and then he ended up killing himself, and she was safe in that shootout. Importantly, he not only contacted Miss Childress, he also contacted several other young teenagers in the Triad area, and authorities aren't sure why he picked the Triad area specifically, but he talked to numerous other kids, and that's how authorities figured out it was him, and ended up taking out charges against him for first-degree kidnapping and solicitation of a minor. And so, you know, it's really, really important to understand how he got to the ability to abduct her. And I think that's kind of part of what we're going to talk about, is how in the interactions between this young girl and him, how he got enough information from her to do that.
Right. I mean, because online usage, internet usage, it's a part of our life. It's a part of almost every single adult's life. If you have a device, smartphone, you're going to be online. And in fact, there's a survey done of teenagers who have access to those devices. And somewhere in the neighborhood of 94 to 96% of them go online and use the internet on a day-to-day basis.
I believe that.
And so based off of that, there's all this potential exposure. Well, what are you possibly getting exposed to out there? At any given time, it's estimated that there are in excess of 750,000 online predators out there combing the internet, searching, grooming, and trying to lure people in. Kids,
right,
more often than not. And it leads to situations like what you have out of Davidson County, where there's kidnapping. And then what can kidnapping lead to? It can lead to human trafficking. It can lead to stuff that happens where violent crime potentially happens. And so obviously her safety was very much compromised by what happened. So, I think it's important for us to go through and talk about, some of these different dangers, how they can be addressed, and what we can look at as parents for being vigilant for our young people.
Yeah, one of the dangers is these online areas where teens congregate, like Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, where a lot of these social media platforms obviously have direct messaging, they have chat room ability, and so that's where you see these online predators focusing. Kind of, 50 years ago, they were focusing and hanging around the same places where young kids were, but now, since kids are on the internet, they can access people from a very long distance. This guy's from Pennsylvania, and was accessing children from Pennsylvania, but ended up coming from Pennsylvania to North Carolina and then subsequently to Arkansas. But, the internet has allowed the ability for an online predator to widen their, group as far as who they can talk to. And that's the scary part of it as a parent.
It really, just to touch on it briefly, it's not just the internet. It's device usage in general.
Mm-hmm.
So just having a device like a smartphone, a laptop, an iPad, think of all the personal data that
Mm-hmm.
you keep on there at a given time. You, me, almost everybody.
Yeah.
You have an iPhone, there's a wallet feature. That wallet feature has airline boarding passes, credit cards, all sorts of things digitally stored on that phone. Not to mention potential banking information. I mean, there's just a litany of stuff. And so for that reason, it is extremely important to always bear in mind that, yes, there are virtual threats, but there are also real life threats that if you don't advise your child to password protect their devices, and I don't just mean like 0000, to make it nice, quick, and easy. I'm talking about an actual passcode or a password to protect the device. You could potentially open it up to where if that device gets stolen, then all of a sudden, all this potential data is accessed. It isn't just those bank records. It isn't just all that stuff, but pictures.
Right.
In the wrong hands, pictures can be a huge clue in to where someone lives, the activities that they do day in and day out, who they hang out with. Google image search is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can upload an image, have Google search it to see what comes back that's sufficiently similar.
Right.
And so there are all these potential things out there. The other thing that I'll say is it also protects your Fourth Amendment rights by password protecting, because inherently these devices, there's not somebody or a police officer or law enforcement officer can't just search if there's a password protection on a device, because it shows an increased expectation of privacy.
Right.
Because you put that on there.
And it is getting. There are some crimes in North Carolina that tie into some of what you've been saying. One of them is, because these cell phones and computers have so much personal information on them, there's a whole litany of computer crimes in North Carolina, and it's a long statute, but essentially hacking into somebody's cell phone, or trying to without their authority, or hacking into their computer without their authority to do anything is a criminal offense. So that's important to, again, password protect your stuff. In addition to that, in addition to having these pictures for all those other reasons you named, it can be used for blackmail as well. And these pictures, whether they're exchanged willingly between teens, or, which we'll get into in a minute, or if somebody gets these pictures unwillingly, they could be used to blackmail somebody to make them do something else. So.
Yeah, and that has the potential to be a felonious activity, whether that's through the blackmail statute, the revenge porn statute, any of those. I mean, that's a potentially felonious activity where even as a young person, if they're engaging in that kind of behavior, they can face serious consequences.
Right, and getting on the revenge porn statute, and if our listeners haven't heard of that, that's a newer statute in North Carolina. It's kind of, in the last decade, around the country, a lot of states have adopted these revenge porn statutes. And essentially what they are is if two people exchange an image that is willingly an image that is lewd in some way, or that shows private areas of a person, and then that person distributes that image to a third party without the consent of the person who sent it, that can be a crime. So in North Carolina, under the age of 18, it's a Class 1 misdemeanor, and over the age of 18, it's a Class H felony, even for the same conduct. And I think the legislature there was thinking about high school students and thinking about how this may happen with high school students, and making it a misdemeanor for high school students instead.
But, if you're not new to For the Record with Greenwood Law, we've touched on some of these issues before when we had Judge Covington out of Davidson County on, and we were talking about the movie Cuties from Netflix. And it's not just revenge porn there if you're taking and exchanging those types of pictures, but there's also a concern about child pornography.
Right.
Even if you are an individual under the age of 18 and you're taking pictures of yourself, of your genitalia, of let's say it's a topless picture, whatever else, and you are taking it, distributing it, Those are all potential ways in which you can be charged with state and federal crimes because you have produced child pornography, because you would be the child, and you have distributed it. And then the person who is receiving it would be receiving the image, and then if they keep it, however long, they're possessing it. And so at that point, that revenge porn statute might be the least of your concerns. Right. And I mean, we've had cases like that. I mean, we had there's a situation, I could think of where, girl wanted to make some extra money.
Right.
And so she was sending these pictures as they were requested to be coming in, and she would get PayPal'd money. Mm-hmm. The danger again with that is it only takes a few pieces of information that come out for a potential online predator to find you.
And I remember that case because it was some friends that found her.
Yeah.
So.
And then she got a reputation around school, all that, and she ended up getting bullied. I mean, there was all these things that happened that she just, I'm sure when she began, never would have imagined that they would have happened.
Right.
And, we were able to address a lot of those concerns with that case and what was going on with that young lady, but not before she, we had to have a conversation where it was like, we're having to talk a DA down off of potentially charging some of this stuff. And that was a come to Jesus moment, if you will.
Right. And I think in remembering that case, and the parents being astonished that this sort of stuff can happen, that's what we want to tell parents, that the seriousness of these sorts of things, that it can become a reality if your child or teenager is engaging in certain types of behavior that they may not even know is criminal, but could really have dire consequences for them.
Yeah, because what we're trying to do today is help set a foundation to educate. From there, as a parent, you may not know exactly what Snapchat does. You may not use Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook yourself. You may not use any of these other platforms, but you got to educate yourself and then have those conversations with your child, regardless of how uncomfortable they may be. It's a choice between, am I going to have a 10 or 15 minute long uncomfortable conversation, or am I going to be worried where my child is because they've been abducted by someone? And that's how you need to look at the choice. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen in every single case, but that's the risk that you run. You have that conversation with your children, when they're young, and you say, well, you got to look both ways before you cross the road, because that's a safe thing to do. That's a real life situation of a safety concern. Well, just because it's virtual doesn't mean that those safety concerns go away. Mm-hmm. And so this is a version of saying, well, look both ways. Look to your left. Look to your right. Develop this sense of what you need to look for out on the internet. If you get some random email from someone you don't know about and it's got links and attachments to all sorts of stuff, don't click those. Mm-hmm. You may end up getting a Trojan horse, malware, spyware, whatever, that infects your computer, takes all that data, and then all of a sudden you've got ID theft.
Right.
And ID theft is a felony in the state of North Carolina if you are caught. But again, that's a big if. But for a teen, if their ID is stolen, that can have huge impacts.
Huge. And it could take years and years for them to unravel that sort of stuff.
Right. Or to even figure out that it was.
Right.
And then by that point, your credit score and all that stuff's just ruined. You're trying to untangle all this stuff that happened to you and prove that your ID was actually stolen, because it's incumbent upon you to prove that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's easy to just say. So, that's where, it's, those kind of things just sort of snowball potentially out of control from the perspective of a teen or a child using the internet, and potentially open the door for those sorts of things.
If you're just joining us on WTOB, this is For the Record with Greenwood Law. I'm Harold Eustache, and with attorney Dylan Greenwood, and we're talking about teen texting and teen social media usage and the dangers of that. And we were talking about some of the dangers. What we haven't gotten into really is some of the social media aspects of these dangers. And there are obviously a number of social media platforms out there now, but there's some major ones. The major ones are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. And they all kind of are different in some ways, but they're similar in a lot of ways too. One of the common themes about these social media platforms is they're really just online messaging services in a sense, and they allow users to think that their conversations are very private when in fact maybe that they aren't. I can tell you from personal experience, when I was in the DA's office, I was part of the gang prosecution team, and a lot of the gang members would talk via instant messaging on Facebook, and they thought that was a secure way to talk to each other, when really that stuff can be subpoenaed by prosecutors and law enforcement very, very easily, and it's easy to see, and it's essentially as public as anything. And also, a lot of times on Facebook and Twitter, some of these conversations that are had in different comments and different things like that are public, and people can see those things,
or pictures.
Or pictures.
Yeah, think about the cases we've had where the discovery includes pictures that somebody's posted on social media of so money or drugs or a gun, and they were a convicted felon, and all of a sudden it's proof potentially that they were possessing something, and that and again it's thought of, oh well, this is just on my Facebook profile, or this is just on my Instagram profile. No, that stuff can, like Harold said, can be subpoenaed, or maybe someone didn't realize they didn't have all the privacy settings checked on Facebook, because that's not a default setting on any of these platforms. So, that's one huge tip, that we would have for parents, especially for their young people. If you're going to let your child use any of these social media platforms, make sure they have the privacy settings turned on, and make sure they're not putting private data on their profiles.
Because social media, inherently, these companies want you to be public. They're going to default to a user being as public as possible because it benefits them. So it's important for parents to make sure they're private.
They want it to be public. They want you to fill out all the information that you can: address, date of birth, your gender, all this demographic stuff. Why do they want you to do that, Harold?
For advertising.
Advertising. They want to target you specifically for all the advertising that they can, which is fine. That's how they make money. But it's fine when you're an adult and you're being targeted, because you can disseminate through all that stuff. But when you're a young person and there's a concern about safety and about the information that you're putting out there, that needs to be kept in check. As an adult, you're making a calculated decision. That's on you. If you want to put all that out there, then fine. Still wouldn't be recommended. It's a lot of information. But it's a little bit different. Whereas, we've got people who are under the age of 18 who are susceptible. Like we said, there's a lot of potential people out there that are trying to do bad things on the internet.
There are, and one avenue that is used quite a bit is Snapchat. And part of the logic that people have is that, they send these messages or pictures or whatever, and they get automatically deleted within a certain period of time. And they think that somehow covers them and makes everything okay. And it of course, it does delete some of these conversations and pictures, but everything can be screenshotted. There are apps to get around the fact that Snapchat alerts you about a screenshot. So again, putting that stuff out there can still be used, and it's still somewhat public. Now, there are certain legal provisions about using pictures in a way to harass or harm someone. If you were to, we did touch on revenge porn earlier, and if you were to take somebody's picture that they had an expectation to be private and use that picture in some way, you could be sued civilly for that as well. So that's important to note. Again, a lot of these different social media platforms, when online predators go on these platforms, their intent is to lure a young person in. So a lot of times they're very methodical about how they contact a person. about the things that they say. They try to make, illicit information from a young person and make it seem that it's just very casual and sort of not as pushy, but they're really just gathering information about this person over time and trying to lure them in. And of course, that is a crime in North Carolina. It's a Class H felony to solicit a minor. And if you meet with that minor, it's a Class G felony. But it still is something that is done every day, and that we have to, as parents, have to be very, very much on the watch for.
And it's possible too to be stalked online. It's called cyber stalking. And in fact, in North Carolina, that's it's a crime to be cyber stalked. Oftentimes, though, it is a lot easier if you, whether you're an adult or you're a young person, and you feel like you're being harassed or stalked online. A lot of times, it is easier in an online setting to avoid or block that person because of the features of these social media platforms or whatever else. So that is certainly a tool that you need to make sure that your child, if they're going to use one of these platforms, knows about. I did want to say, if your child is using a platform that you don't know about, take the time and educate yourself about it. What is the platform? What's the purpose of the platform? How do the features of the platform work? Every single one of these platforms puts out some sort of user guide because they want people to use it and to use all the features. So just make sure that you are taking that time to educate yourself. That way you can have those conversations with your teen and your child about their usage with that. That also means to check in with your child, to look at what's on their phone, see what apps are there, monitor that stuff. A lot of phones and a lot of devices come with parental control functions already built in. Take advantage of those. If they don't, there are plenty of software and apps available to incorporate so that you can monitor exactly what happens. One of the easiest ways to monitor what happens is to review search engine history on internet browsers to see what's coming about, see what your child is searching for. Are they searching for potentially dangerous stuff or stuff that's maybe too mature for them? Whatever it may be, that way you are aware. It's important to just take that little bit of a time and an opportunity to do that so that you know what's going on, because sometimes there are instances where online predators will have, one of the ways in which they groom is by talking, getting comfortable with the child or teen that they're talking to, and getting them to start looking at certain things, to search for certain things,
right?
So that they can start to wrap their mind around certain ideas that predator wants them to wrap their mind around. And whether you're male or female, your mind is not fully developed in your teenage years by any way, shape, or form, regardless of how mature you are, and you're still very much impressionable. And think back to when you were a teenager. What did you want? You just wanted to belong. You wanted somebody to, you wanted to have friends, and you wanted to feel like you're a part of something. That's what social media does. It helps foster that you're a part of something, that you're a part of a community. That's fine. That's the good part of it. But that always needs to be kept in check with what gets put out there on social media. So some of the ways in which you can identify whether or not, and this is just to educate young people about whether or not they're interacting with somebody who might be a predator, is one of the big red flags is wanting to have private conversations on these platforms. That's a biggie. Second thing is insist that their online relationships be kept private or secret. Don't tell anybody about this. No one else needs to know. Third is ask their targets to provide personal information, like addresses, full names, phone numbers, dates of birth, any of that stuff. It's amazing how much information can be found with just a few pieces of information to start that process. And then another thing is that tending to do some stalking online to uncover information about their targets, and they show how much they know. So all of a sudden you're talking to somebody and it seems like, oh, they just know so much about me. It's like we really click. Well, it's because they've done their prior research about you. That's not normal, and that needs to be a huge red flag. And the fifth thing that you need to watch out for is asking a target a barrage of questions in order to get their targets to release more personal information. So you're just asking questions over and over and over again, and these personal questions are kind of slipped in so that it's innocuous. It's not a big deal. Well, you've answered all these other questions. Why not this one? And then the last one is trying to convince targets that everything they're doing and all the information they're revealing is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with it. Right. And it's not. Those are not normal behaviors for what needs to be, or for a safe interaction on the internet. So there's just a few tips and stuff to be mindful of. Again, it's important to educate your child, your teen, about what's going on, and educate yourself before anything happens.
Thank you, WTOB listeners, for joining us on this episode of For the Record with Greenwood Law. We've been talking about how parents and teenagers can protect themselves, and we have, in our practice, we've seen so much of this, and we can't expound on it all in detail, but we get to see how these instances actually play out in real life. They are very, very real, and we just implore parents to be very vigilant about protecting their teenagers in this environment of social media and the internet and so on and so forth. And that gets us to what we're going to talk about next week, which is about a charge called misdemeanor child abuse, and how in this pandemic, one of the issues that's happened and cropped up so much is parents having to leave their children at home. And kids that grew up in the 90s maybe feel like that they got left at home a lot, but that is a different sort of animal now and can be charged. And so that's something that we run into quite a bit. And so we want to delve that out and tackle that a little bit. But before we go, can we read the Greenwood Law Bill of Rights?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I will not represent myself in a court of law. Second, I will not do law enforcement's job for them. 3, I will not make statements when stopped by law enforcement. And 4, I will not consent to searches when asked by law enforcement. And 5, I will not be my own star witness for the prosecution. Remember, it's so important to educate yourself, to know your rights, and to stay safe out there, and to remain vigilant about all the crazy things life can throw at you. So this is For the Record with Greenwood Law, signing off.